I'll never forget the weekend I spent alone in that cabin. It was supposed to be an escape from everything, a few days of solitude to clear my head. But what I experienced out there, I still can't explain it. I've thought about it over and over, trying to convince myself it wasn't real, that maybe I was just overtired or imagining things. But deep down I know the truth. Something was out there with me, and it wasn't human. A friend of mine, Jeremy, was the one who suggested the cabin. He'd stayed there a few times and called it a hidden gem. No distractions, just you and nature, he'd said. At first, I wasn't sure. I'm not the most outdoorsy person, but after a bad breakup and mounting stress at work, the thought of being completely off the grid for a couple of days sounded appealing. No cell service, just peace and quiet. Jeremy gave me vague directions and warned me it was rusted. I figured that meant no electricity, maybe an outhouse, but I didn't care. I packed like just some food, a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and a couple of books. The drive was long, winding up a series of narrow mountain roads that seemed to get steeper and more isolated the higher I went. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting, casting the forest in long shadows. The cabin itself was nothing special, a small, weathered structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof. It looked abandoned. Inside, it was even more bare bones. A single room with a creaky wooden floor, a fireplace, a rickety table, and a set of stairs leading to a loft. The only light came from the flashlight in my hand and the last rays of sunlight streaming through the dirty windows. The first night was uneventful. I lit a fire, a quick meal, and settled into the sleeping bag on the floor. The wind outside was strong, howling through the trees, but it was oddly comforting. I fell asleep quickly, but I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. At first, I didn't know why. The fire had burned down to embers, and the room was pitch dark. I sat up listening, and that's when I heard a faint tapping sound coming from somewhere above me. It was so soft, I almost convinced myself it was just the wind. But it was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the loft. I shined my flashlight up the stairs, but the beam barely reached the top. The sound stopped the moment the light hit the loft. My heart was racing, but I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a bird that had gotten in somehow. I didn't go up to check. Instead, I stoked the fire and sat there until the first light of dawn. The next day, I decided to stay busy. I went for a long hike, exploring the woods around the cabin. The air was crisp and cool, and for a while, I felt better. But as the afternoon wore on, I started to get an uneasy feeling. It was subtle at first, like the sensation of being watched. Every time I turned around, there was nothing there, just endless trees. I convinced myself I was imagining things, but the feeling didn't go away. Then I noticed something odd. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just that deafening stillness. I headed back to the cabin, picking up my pace. By the time I got inside, the sun was setting, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. I locked the door, something I hadn't done the night before, and double-checked the windows. That night, I couldn't relax. I kept hearing faint noises outside, branches snapping, leaves crunching, like something was moving through the woods. I kept telling myself it was just an animal, but deep down I knew something was wrong. Around midnight, the tapping started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it up at the loft. Nothing, but the sound didn't stop. It felt like it was coming from everywhere: the loft, the walls, even the floor. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow move across the room, but it was gone before I could focus on it. I was frozen, clutching the flashlight, my back pressed against the wall. The tapping stopped, and the silence that followed was even worse. Then I heard it, a deep, guttural growl. It came from directly behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight wildly. The beam caught the edges of the room, the empty fireplace, the staircase. There was nothing there, but the growl hadn't been my imagination. I could still feel the vibration of it in my chest, like it was inside the cabin with me. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, yanking it open and running into the night. The forest was dark, the moonlight barely enough to see by, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. My flashlight flickered again, and then it went out completely. That's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and way too close. They didn't echo like mine, they were quieter, but somehow more menacing, like whatever was following me didn't need to run to catch up. I turned around, and for a brief moment, I saw something. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, twisted limbs that didn't move like they should. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes, they weren't eyes at all, just empty, glowing sockets that seemed to burn right through me. I ran faster, the branches tearing at my face and clothes. The growling followed me, growing louder and more distorted, like it was coming from all directions. My legs felt like they were going to give out, but I didn't stop until I saw the edge of the forest. I burst out onto the road, collapsing in the dirt. When I looked back, the thing was gone. The forest was still again, as if nothing had happened. But I know what I saw. When I got back to town, I had to tell Jeremy what had happened. He just laughed and said, "I told you the place was rustic." I asked him if he'd ever heard anything strange out there, and he got quiet. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's probably just the wind, or animals. I don't know what I encountered in that cabin, but I know it wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal." I haven't been back since, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear that tapping in my dreams.